Welcome into the College Football Overtime Podcast. My name is Garrett Chapman. His name is Abe Gordon. We got a lot of stuff we want to go over because the NCAA cover athletes, they were just officially announced earlier this week, and we want to discuss who was snubbed, what we think about the players on the cover, and a lot more. Plus, top coaches in college football. No surprise at number one, but we will discuss every other other coach on that list, and we're going to be really excited to get into that. Also, happy Mother's Day to everybody out there. This is the Mother's Day weekend. Abe Gordon, I know you probably had a fun weekend planned for mom. How was everything for you? But let's welcome you in here. How you doing, bud?
Doing good, brother. I went out and saw my nephew's t-ball game. My mom was out there, so got to spend a little over an hour with her there, and then on with it. Yeah, but
There you
not a
go.
bad day. Beautiful outside, and so pretty good Mother's Day here in Atlanta.
Absolutely, no doubt. And I was able to spend some time with mom, and that's always a good thing. And I hope all of you listening and watching, or however you're consuming this podcast, I hope you had a fantastic Mother's Day weekend. And yeah, let's talk. Let's jump into some college football. What do you say, Abe Gordon? Coming in here with the NCAA cover athletes. It was just officially announced, of course, the 2025 NCAA college football game is going to be making the return here in a couple of months. I think it was like in July at some point. And the 6 players gracing the cover, they're going to be on here right now. So Quinn Ewers, Travis Hunter, Carson Beck, Donovan Edwards, Jalen Milrow, and Quinshon Judkins. They're going to be joining the likes of Chris Winkie and Sean Alexander, Larry Fitzgerald, Desmond Howard, Reggie Howard, Reggie Bush, all of the legends of college football. It is so cool getting your face and your nameplate on the back or the front cover of the NCAA college football game. Just a really cool thing.
It's timeless. Like it really is. I know it's not quite Madden, but with the return of the game, maybe it does get to that point. But I mean, come on, man. Like no matter what happens from here on out with your life, with your career, this is something you always get to show your family. Obviously, eventually, probably your kids, stuff like that. To say, hey, I was one of multiples recognized as special that year, shaping the sport. And so it's a pretty cool. And then just the return of the game. Like this is probably going to be the most owned version of this game ever. Right. I mean, it's never going to be more than what it is now. So that's pretty awesome as well.
It's a game that defined my childhood. I know this is one of the reasons I got into college football is because of NCAA college football games. I mean, playing those games and doing the road to glory and the dynasty mode, all that stuff was just so much fun. I loved Madden too, and I played a lot of Madden growing up. But NCAA, it was just a timeless game, and I mean, I sit here and think about some of the coaches, or excuse me, some of the players who never got a chance to be on a cover. And like you look at like a Johnny Manziel, you look at I mean, I guess RG3 was one of the last ones to do it. I mean, all of the great college football players, Jaden Daniels, Caleb Williams, guys who just came out right now. I mean, Trevor Lawrence is another one. Donovan Smith, the Slim Reaper. There's so many unbelievable players. Derrick Henry was another. Tons of just incredible college football players who would have been on the cover of this game. And it's just kind of a bummer because you think about all of those other players, all those guys who graced the cover, whether they won the Heisman Trophy or they were just an electric player in the college football ranks. It was just such a cool thing, and the opportunity to celebrate these players, celebrate the sport that we all love. I mean, I think it's really cool, and I'm glad that the college football game is, bringing on multiple players onto this, because we haven't had one in a long time, and I mean, you go up and down this list, and it makes sense pretty much across the board. I mean, Quinn Ewers is the starting quarterback. He with the most starting experience, I think, coming back in college football for the most part, except for I mean, what is it?
There's a couple. I mean, Dylan Gabriel's going to have
Dylan
more
Gabriel
starting
is who I'm
experience.
thinking
Yeah,
of. Yeah,
a couple of them, but yeah.
yeah. I mean, like there are players out there with a ton of starting experience, but not one who played in a college football playoff last year. And I mean, Travis Hunter's one of the most talented players in college football, the two-way star of a player. Carson Beck playing for the best team in the country. He has a potential to be a number 1 overall pick. Donovan Edwards, he was one that surprised me a little bit. he's a really good player, but he's someone from the reigning national champions. I mean, it makes sense from that angle. Jalen Milroe, I mean, of course, you're the Alabama starting quarterback, and then Quinshon Judkins, who I think is the best running back in college football, outside of the guy who I feel like got snubbed. And he starts our list of, players who I feel like got snubbed. Number one, I think is shocking, is Ollie Gordon, Oklahoma State running back. He is one of the most electric all-purpose players in college football. I mean, you can point to a Travis Hunter. You can say, hey, he's a really, really good player. He plays both ways. But Ollie Gordon does a little bit of everything for an Oklahoma State team that was pretty damn good last year. And he helped resurrect that program. They were struggling at the beginning of the year last season, and he was able to elevate them. Noah Fafita, Jackson Dart, Damian Martinez. There's so many fantastic players. And Abe, I'll give you a second here to name some of your players who you felt were snubbed. Luther Burden's another one. But you go up and down this list of players. College football is in an interesting spot, and I said this right before we got going. It feels like it's a big transition year, but you kind of put to bed exactly what I was saying, and I'm gonna let you give a second. Just what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I just think like every year, as you see a group exit to head to the NFL, there's a bunch of players that you're not necessarily familiar with that come into their own and are the next class, if you will, the next faces of the game, the next saviors of the sport, whatever you want to deem them. I mean, just talk about Ollie Gordon, like realistically, and I understand what you're saying about him, but like 2 years ago, no one knew who he was, even though he was the starting running back, even though he was leading the team in carries. And then
Right.
last year, he kind of blows up to the point where, and even if he hadn't returned, you knew who he was. I just think there's a lot of guys that on a given year, you don't necessarily know about them to start the season, but by October into November, like, oh man, like this guy's going to be a top 20 pick when he comes out. This guy's going to be this, that. He's the guy that you watch this team for. So I understand you look at a lot of teams and say, man, look at all the talent that's gone. There's still talent that's there. You just haven't been made aware of them yet.
Yeah, and I think it's going to be college football's in a good spot. I mean, I love where the sport is on the football field. I'll talk about off the field. That's a whole different issue that I don't want to get too deep into. We have before on this podcast, and you can always go back and listen to those episodes where we go nosedive into all of the problems that exist in college football. But as far as the players go, as far as the talent that exists in this sport, I think it's just fun and it's spread around in such a way now that there is something a little closer to parity, what we saw last year in college football that we really haven't seen in the sport. I say that the same year that we have a 15-0 national champion, but at the end of the day, it's like college football. I mean, the players that exist in this sport. I mean, it's in a really good spot. But the coaches who make all of that happen, I want to talk about the top ones in the sport, and I'm just going to name our top 10. And we can name our 5 through what do you think about 5 through 10? We'll start our 6 through 10. We'll start there. And then we'll name our honorable mentions and then give our top 5. What do you say there? Or do you
Yeah,
want to
let's
do
do
that in
it.
reverse order? 1 through 5?
No.
All right.
See, because we're
We'll
not
go
good
10
enough
through
to have
6.
written it down properly.
Oh, fair enough. All right. So we're going to go 10 through 6. And then I'm going to name off some of my honorable mentions. So I'm going to start at number 10. I'm going to say Dan Lanning from Oregon. He's probably one of the fastest risers in college football right now. And he inherited a program that I would say was in a pretty good spot. Mario Cristobal was, of course, a strong head coach over there at Oregon before he made the move over to Miami. But Dan Lanning was sort of, he made a very interesting move this offseason. I think he really had an opportunity to jump ship at Oregon. And it was really one of the first times somebody chose to stay at Oregon rather than going to a marquee program. I mean, just the last couple of years, you have Chip Kelly who leaves. He goes off to the NFL. You have Mario Cristobal, like I mentioned. You have, I'm blanking on his name. What's his name? Who left for Florida State. And struggled down there. But look, at the end of the day, it's like Oregon was not viewed as a destination program. It was viewed as a B-level program, and I think they were kind of okay with it, but they were trying to get out of that ranking. And Dan Lanning are supposedly interviews for the Alabama job. Maybe he avoids it completely. I can't remember what exactly the story was with it, but he opts not to go take the job. And I think that he was the number one option for Alabama for the head coaching gig. But he decided to stay because he believed in what's going on over there in Eugene. And I do too. I really think that Oregon has established themselves as one of the best programs in college football this upcoming season. They're going to be in the top 5, I think. They have to replace their starting quarterback, but then you go and get a Dylan Gabriel, and he's going to be your starter next year. I mean, that's about as good as it could possibly get when you're replacing a guy like Bo Nix. And Dan Lanning, I mean, he's got, what, 5 losses? 3 of those came to Kalen DeBoer and the Washington Huskies, and he's not there anymore. But now you're moving into the Big Ten. It's good. You got a whole host of other issues, but I think Oregon's going to be one of the top programs, one of the top teams next season. And Dan Lanning has really unlocked the potential of that program, and he really might have them in position to do a lot of big things. But he's one of the lesser accomplished coaches that I have in my top 10. Who do you have number 10, Abe?
Yeah, for number 10 for me, I think I'm gonna go and look. My list is gonna be all over the place. The guys that are not at big schools or maybe haven't done whatever. But this one's an interesting because I feel he's 10 and falling. I'm gonna put Dabo Swinney there at 10. I'm not throwing him that high right now. Until he's proven to me that he can adapt to the current nature of the game, it's just very difficult to put him in that top tier. And so I have Dabo Swinney at number 10.
Wow. That's a stunner.
I'm going to have a couple of these you're not going to like.
Okay. I will agree to disagree on that one. I got him coming up here in just a little bit. My number 9 is Mike Norvell from Florida State. I think he's done a pretty good job of turning that program around. And I mean, you go back the last 2 years. I mean, last season, of course, you have the 13-0 regular season and the ACC championship win. The year before that, you really started to see some of the wheels start turning down there at Tallahassee. The biggest thing for him right now is what does he do in the wake of Jordan Travis leaving for the NFL and graduating and moving on. He was the lifeblood of that program. Now, of course, you're bringing in DJ Uiagalelei, who's a great player for Clemson. He was a solid player for Clemson, solid player for Oregon State. He's a guy who you're coming in and you're hoping is going to help carry the mantle that Jordan Travis helped put up and establish down there in Tallahassee. Mike Norvell, I mean, notwithstanding the beatdown of unholy measures that they had in the Orange Bowl against Georgia, but besides that game, last season was a pretty incredible run for Florida State. And of course, you had the way it ended, the snub in the college football playoff and everything else. But I don't want to let that taint all that Mike Norvell has done down there in Tallahassee. He dragged that program out from the depths. It was a brutal spot. It was in a bad spot. And he was able to kind of bring it up. And he did it on the backs of transfer athletes. I mean, he was one of the poster children of this new era of college football. And that's what made him in that matchup against Dabo Swinney so interesting is the fact that you have Mr. I want to develop from only the recruiting ranks, and he does not take any players at all really from the transfer portal compared to Mike Norvell, who's effectively his entire roster, with a few exceptions, was made up of transfer players. He's adapted well to this new era of college football, and he comes in at number 9 for me.
Yeah, Mike Norvell was very close to cutting this list for me. I actually had him right behind Dabo at 11. At number 9, I'm going to go with Lane Kiffin. Still a lot to prove. Obviously, a couple of disappointments based on maybe what the expectations here or there may have been. But I'm going to go with Lane Kiffin. I think he's done a great job recruiting. He's done an even better job out of the transfer portal. And quite frankly, I think he's doing it in a location that he probably doesn't have necessarily an even playing field with some of his biggest competitors. And so I think it's been very impressive what he can do. I will say number 9 is Lane Kiffin.
You know, ironically, he was my 11. So
they were very close to flipping for me. Don't worry. Yeah.
I just think that Lane Kiffin, we've seen the bad. I think to judge him, you have to take in all parties, all accounts of everything that he was. The pre-Alabama Lane Kiffin was a lot different than what it is post-Alabama, I think. He really flipped the switch when he went down there at FIU and everything changed for him, or down there in Florida. But he's had Ole Miss up at a high level, and I think this year he's one of our biggest risers in college football as far as like the respect rankings go, if you want to say it that way. But Lane Kiffin is going to be on this list next year. I firmly believe that fact. But I'm going to go to my number 8. Another person who came through the rehabilitation program with Nick Saban. It's Steve Sarkisian, a really good offensive coordinator, but struggled as a head coach at times. Of course, we saw what he was. Um, I mean, the pre Sark era or the pre Saban era, I should say, when he was struggling with off field issues over in USC and at Washington. Of course, we knew him pretty well here in Atlanta. He was the offensive coordinator for the Atlanta Falcons, but Steve Sarkisian has really turned Texas back onto the map. And like they are who they are right now because of Steve Sarkisian. And some people just really don't like him very much, but he's a good coach. And I think he's done a very good job of bringing Texas back up. He, of course, got them to a Big 12 championship win last year, and then he got them into the college football playoff and was just a couple plays away from potentially playing in a national championship game last season. And I think Texas is not going anywhere. Of course, they're making the transition into the SEC this upcoming season. That's going to be very interesting to watch. If he's able to sustain that level of success that he had last year with Quinn Ewers and company all coming back, you're replacing a lot of skill players this year, but you do have that quarterback position solidified. That is going to be a big indicator of success for Steve Sarkisian and the Texas Longhorns, but I think he's number 8 on my list.
Yeah, I got him quite a bit higher, to be honest. We'll hear where he falls on my list in a little bit. I'm going to go with Lincoln Riley at number 8. And you may have Lincoln Riley higher, or you may have him not at all. It kind of depends how you view what he's been able to accomplish since taking over. Really, you got to count the Oklahoma years, but also more at SC right now. And it's just, honestly, he probably could be higher, but disappointment of a season this past year when you're returning a Heisman Trophy winner and you didn't come anywhere close to getting it done. It just felt like an incomplete roster. It felt like the questions that you have been asking me for 2 years about the defense there at SC, it refused to be answered. And until we get that locked up, he's going to have to stay towards the bottom half of this list for me. So he is Lincoln Riley at number 8.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me all that much because I have him here at number 7. I think this is just where he belongs right now until he can actually unlock that next level. But you can't not have him in your top 7 right now, in my opinion, because of the sustained success that he's had on offense. I mean, I understand you're the head coach and you're responsible for a lot more than just the offensive success, but we saw what Oklahoma was able to do in the final years of Lincoln Riley right before he moved on. He was actually able to put together a couple of solid defensive teams. They were, I mean, don't get it twisted. They were always an offensive first team. I mean, that's just what they've always been under Lincoln Riley. And of course, it's continued over there at USC. But it just feels like a lot of waste right now with Lincoln Riley. The what could have been with Lincoln Riley, I like the coach. I think he's really good. And I think he can find that next gear. And if he can eventually find somebody to dominate on defense, if I just don't think his offense is super conducive to success on defense because everything affects everything in college football and the way that he plays on offense. I mean, it absolutely has an effect on defenses. He plays fast, he gets up to the line of scrimmage, he does all that, and it has no impact on the defense. But it's just an interesting spot right now. But you have that many Heisman Trophy winning quarterbacks. You've had your team in the college football playoff that many times. You have to be top 7 for me. But so that's where he's going to be.
You're not going to like my next couple of guys, and that's okay. It's my list. You have yours. But it's kind of a proven track record. It's a trust in their ability to build a program because these guys are not going to win a national championship. I openly admit that, at least not at their current school. My number 7, however, is Lance Leipold. I am on that train, man, and I will ride it all the way. It's just he just wins. He builds programs. He's done an outstanding job at Kansas since coming there from other schools, Buffalo, and then even smaller before that. I don't have a great argument for him, but I just know that if I were starting a franchise, would I be picking certain guys above him? Like right now, blank slate, would I pick my number 10 pick Dabo Sweeney above number 7 Lance Leipold? I don't think I would. Again, just my list. And so
Sure.
I understand it. If he takes an opportunity to jump to a larger school, maybe then we'll know if I'm wrong on this, that he just can't get it done at the highest level, or maybe he could prove that I'm right on this. But for the time being, we're stuck with him staying kind of in that middle tier of Power 5 schools at Kansas. And I think he's done an outstanding job. So I have Lance Leipold 7. I understand there's some
Mhm.
conversation about that.
No, I like it. It doesn't actually surprise me all that much, Abe Gordon, just because
Wait
I
till
know
number
you.
6.
I know you very well. So, I mean, at the end of the day, I like that in here. I considered putting him in here in the top 10, not at number 6 necessarily, but I have him on my list. I thought about having him on my list. Specifically, this is the big glaring thing for me. It's the fact that, I mean, the Kansas Jayhawks were 9-60 in the 6 seasons before Lance Leipold arrived at Kansas. And they went 9-4 or 9-4 last year in a season where they lost their starting quarterback for multiple games. You know, I mean, he came into this team back in what 2021, I want to say. Um, they were winless in 2020, and then all of a sudden he has them on the map and bowl eligibility within 2 seasons. And last year he wins 9 games. I mean, like, look, the job that he has done is really second to none. And so I can respect him being on your list. I won't knock you for that, not even in the slightest. I think he's a damn good coach. I think I don't know if he's ever going to fully unlock his full potential
Well,
at
he'd
a
have to
place
go to
like
a bigger
Kansas.
school, and he'd have to do what he's done at smaller schools at bigger schools, and
Yeah,
it's just tough to project out as to whether that's possible or not.
and talking, but you look at other places that have loyalty, and then there's my number 6, who it's Kyle Whittingham from Utah. He's a guy who's been at Utah since 1994, and he was a defensive line coach then, and then he was elevated to defensive coordinator, and then he coached under Urban Meyer and replaced him as the head coach back in 2004 when he went to the University of Florida. And since then, he's just been the model of consistency. You know, I mean, I think he's had only 2 losing seasons in 19 years. That's when the Utah made their biggest jump. They went from the group of 5 to the Pac-12, and he just continued to have success. And I just had Lincoln Riley on my list, and he's dominated the USC Trojans. Utah has had such a smaller budget than anybody else that they played, but he won 2 Pac-12 titles in a row. He in those 19 years, he's had 8 top 25 finishes in the AP poll. He's just the model of consistency. He's been a really, really damn good coach for Utah, and sometimes I don't feel like Utah always gets its flowers. It's not always respected. Cam Rising, another really, really tenured player. He was injured all of last year. Did not take a snap as far as I can remember. And he still had Utah competing to win games consistently throughout the season. You lose like half of your roster to injury. And it's just they were still consistently Utah. And that has everything to do with the head coach.
Believe it or not, I have Kyle Whittingham as my number 6 as well. And you had a lot of reasoning. It just they are classically overlooked. There's no denying it. They are kind of playing in the shadows there in what was the Pac-12, behind Big Brothers Oregon and
Mhm.
USC, and just routinely stepped onto the field and went toe to toe with them. Never had better recruiting classes, never had more 5 stars. You could go down the list of what they didn't have that other schools did when they kept winning those ball games. It's just tough to deny Kyle Whittingham. I was not going to allow him to be overlooked in this list. I'm glad you had him there as well for many of the same reasons. So not much else to say there, but Kyle Whittingham at number 6 for me as well.
Yep. I just think that's the right place for him to be. Again, I don't think he's ever going to go anywhere just because I mean you've been there for 19 years. I mean I don't know why Utah would ever move on, and I don't know where he would go. I mean he seems pretty solidified where he is, and he's kind of old school in that way, and I've always appreciated that about him. But I kind of want to go through my honorable mentions before we jump into the top 5. And Abe, I'm just going to kind of steamroll through some of these real quick, and just tell me if you agree or disagree that these coaches could, or if you think that any of these guys can jump into the top 10 as a consensus top 10 coach in college football. But I'm going to start here. It's Lane Kiffin. You have him in your top 10 already. I think he's pretty much there.
Yeah, it's right. It's
I'm
right on
almost at
the
him there.
border. Yeah.
Lance Leopold's another one. But moving on, Mike Gundy, a coach at Oklahoma State. He's been another model of
Nah.
consistency. I don't think he's a top 10 guy. I have him in an honorable mention list just because he's been at the same place for a long time. I mean, he's had some really good seasons at Oklahoma State, but the Pokes have also had some pretty brutal seasons as well. So it's like I can't really have him in that top 10 list. Luke Fickell is one, the Wisconsin head coach. He's somebody who I think could have been on this list just a few years ago. It may be like skating through in that 9-10 spot. But this is a big prove it year for the second year coach over there at Wisconsin. I want to see what he can do now that he's had a little bit more time to bring in some of his guys. Of course, you have an injury to your starting quarterback last year. It's a brutal spot for any team. But at the end of the day, and it's also your first year as the head coach, I think he could potentially get onto this top 10 list with another good season or two. Wisconsin's a really good program who I think can return to prominence under Luke Fickell. Moving on, let's say Josh Heupel. What do you think about that one?
Yeah, I just my whole thing is you've got to show me some sustained level of execution as a head coach, and all of the guys you're just it's either too new or it hasn't
Yeah.
been consistent enough. So no, I think he's doing a good job. I think he can climb up coaching leaderboards. Can he get to the top 10? I mean, you got to do this where you have 9 or 10 wins 2, 3, 4 years in a row, not
Yeah.
once every third year. So I'm still waiting on that.
Yeah, sure. And that's why I think Dan Lanning was a touch controversial at maybe at number 10. I just think it's just
Well,
as much.
he's kind of the exception. I'll get to him on my
Yeah.
list in a little bit.
Oh, all right. So here we go a little bit more. Kirk Ferentz at Iowa.
No.
Ooh. He's the
He's not getting better as a head coach. He's had plenty of years. Yeah, he's had plenty of years to do what he's doing. He's not going to improve at this age. They are what they are. They might get hot for a year, or the offense might click here and there, and they can do some things. But him individually as a top 10 coach, his time is come and gone.
Yeah, I tend to agree. One quick thing on Josh Heupel, though, I do think that he's going to have a big season this year. Tennessee, Nico Amaleva at starting quarterback. That's a really talented guy. We kind of got a sneak peek of what we can expect from the most talented quarterback prospect in Tennessee football history, going back to Peyton Manning. He's right up there with him. And if Tennessee can return to prominence, look, Josh Heupel's found a lot of success down there with the Tennessee Volunteers. But you add in the most talented quarterback, most talented prospect that he's ever had with Nico, I think they could have some big success. Keep going down this list. Let's go to James Franklin. Would you ever have him on this list? As Abe Gordon is getting some kisses from a beautiful puppy here.
I would have him on the list once he proves it. He's right behind Dabo for me. I had Norvell right behind Dabo, but right behind Norvell would be James Franklin. But he's had opportunity after opportunity, and there just seems to be that bridge he can't gap, or the gap he can't bridge. And so he's stuck. He's stuck in a holding pattern somewhere in the top 15, but not quite the top 10, at least in my opinion.
I tend to agree. And then last one for me is Dave Doran, a coach who kind of checks the box that you were talking about. You want to win 8-9 games consistently for a run of 4,
yeah,
5,
but you also
years.
got to win 11 at some point, 10 at some point. Model of consistency, no denying that. Very good coach, but come on, no one's thinking Dave Doran is going to be a national championship winning head coach. And these other guys that we've named, if put in the right situation, maybe I feel that way. I don't know. I could say that about him.
Yeah, and I think that there are a number of coaches out there who I think we're going to jump into this list of it. I think college football, this is just the personification of where we are in the sport right now. I think there's lots of talent in the coaching ranks in college football. I think we're moving into a kind of a good situation here. But I'm going to move into our top fives. I'm going to start with my number 5. I'm going to have Brian Kelly at number 5. I think he has been one of the most unnecessarily hated on coaches in college football over the last 15 years or so. And look, when you coach at Notre Dame, it tends to happen. You know, people talk about you a lot. People treat you like you're the Dallas Cowboys. I mean, it's very similar to that. But he's the winningest coach in the history of that program, one of the grandfather programs in college football. he is the all-time winningest coach for that program. And then on top of that, he comes down to LSU and does nothing but win more. I mean, he comes into an LSU program that was struggling the year before he got here, and only wins 10 games and takes him to an SEC championship game. I mean, Brian Kelly is just the model of winning. The dude wins wherever he goes. And people thought he was going to get a rude introduction when he came into the SEC. That is not exactly the case. I mean, his family has moved down south and he's done just fine. And Brian Kelly, the question was, oh, he doesn't fit the culture. Well, if you win, the culture adjusts to you. And Brian Kelly is top 5 coach in college football. I considered actually having him higher on my list. I he at 4 and 5, I think, is interchangeable.
Yeah, I do have him higher on my list. At number 5, I have Ryan Day, and you can't ignore the past couple of seasons, the letdowns against your rival. That has to play its own role, but you also can't ignore the continual accumulation of talent year after year, the amount of guys put into the NFL or the amount of top prospects coming onto campus. And look, it's going to be a big prove it year, because if they can't do it this year, you certainly would have to drop him out of your top 5. But I've got Ryan Day right there at 5. He's come very close. He's in position to do what they want him to do and to accomplish what could maybe put him into the top 3 of this list, but he's got to prove it. In the last couple of years, he hasn't. And so we'll see if he can this year.
Yeah, I kind of want Brian Kelly at my number 4 too, but I'll just roll with the list that I put together, and I'll stick with my number 4 is Kalen DeBoer, the new head coach of the Alabama Crimson Tide. Talk about a guy who's also won at every spot that he's been. I mean, like, this is a guy who's done just that. He had his Washington Huskies playing for a national championship last year. Of course, they were outmatched against Michigan, and they were playing a team that was, I mean, a really good football team in their own right. But you're playing with a banged up quarterback, banged up players. I mean, it was a difficult situation for them, not taking anything away from Michigan by any means. But he's a damn good coach. He's a guy who won the Pac-12 championship in its last season, which was one of the most competitive conferences in college football last year. His career also is just so interesting. He's a guy who started at the tiny school at Sioux Falls, and he led them to 3 national titles over a 5-year stretch. Does that have much to do with where he is right now and the success that he's having at the college football, the highest level of college football? Yeah, maybe not, but the road is definitely something to celebrate, and it's something that I think is very interesting. And I mean, look, all DeBoer has seemed to do is win, and I think he's going to continue doing that at Alabama. People talk about how he's going to be a step down from Nick Saban. Duh, because anybody in college football was going to be a step down from Nick Saban, and it's just a different flavor. It's like some people like strawberry ice cream, other people like chocolate, but they're both part on the like that the short list for a lot of different people of the top flavors in ice cream, right? Kalen DeBoer is the same kind of way, and it's just different at Alabama, and that's what happens when you have the greatest college football coach of all time, the guy who won multiple national titles and had a way of doing things down there at Alabama. And Kalen DeBoer is a winner in his own right. He has a different way of doing things, and I think he's going to find his own level of success at Alabama. And I think we're going to learn just how good he can be now that he is at a marquee grandfather level program at Alabama. And Kalen DeBoer, he's at number 4.
Yeah, for my number 4, I'm going to a guy you mentioned earlier. That's Steve Sarkisian. There was an opportunity that he was way down on this list a couple years ago, but he has climbed his way up. And the thing for him is, again, similar to Ryan Day, an accumulation of talent, development of quarterbacks as well, and on both sides of the ball. And that's, to me, the big difference between what Lincoln Riley's doing and what Steve Sarkisian is doing is Lincoln Riley's not getting it done on defense. Steve Sarkisian is. And we saw that by a number of defensive players sent into the draft this year as well. So tough adjustment into the SEC, but it feels like they are ready to come into the SEC and not suffer the way I expect Oklahoma to suffer. They're going to cause some suffering. They're going to be disruptors as they enter this conference. And so I've got Steve Sarkisian at number 4, very high on what he's done the past couple of years, what they potentially could do this year and moving forward.
Yeah, I think that's a interesting one. I like Steve Sarkisian. I think Steve Sarkisian has just about some of the most potential on this list to rise quicker than anybody else. I think him coming into the SEC next year, if he comes in and really sets it on fire, then he's going to be shooting up this list here very quickly in short order. I just don't think we have enough success necessarily to have him up in the top five. We've seen kind of the bowels of where he has been at times, and that, of course, is part of his resume, and he's grown and he's developed into the coach that he is today because of it. But we'll see where we can get him up here on this list. I think he's going to be one of the most interesting programs to follow, Texas, as they move into the SEC next year. My number three won't be very surprising to you. It's Dabo Sweeney. I understand where you have him. I understand your rationale for it. But when you talk about resumes, outside of the guy who's number one on both of our lists, I'm sure, there is no better resume in college football. There just isn't. I mean, it's a guy who I understand that all of the changes that are going on in college football right now, and he's refused to adapt for better or for worse. His loyalty to his
Well,
coordinators
it's not for better. There, it's for worse. We
it is for
understand that.
worse.
I
No,
mean,
it is for
that's
worse.
don't flip side this thing.
I'm
It's
not
for
okay.
worse.
Okay. It has led to a bit of a downfall, and the hubris of Dabo Sweeney, I think, has a lot to do with that. And that's just me speaking. It's just my opinion of the man. I think he thinks very highly of himself and his program, but at the same time, he's won multiple national titles. He was the first true challenger to Nick Saban. Before Dabo Sweeney, Nick Saban had the rest of the country in a vice grip. I mean, you could say Urban Meyer, maybe. He beat him once. Dabo Sweeney beat him multiple times in a national title game. And I mean, you look at this as I mean, he's had all-time great players. Yeah, I mean, you have Deshaun Watson to Trevor Lawrence. I mean, you have elite players on offense, elite players on defense. He's put into the NFL. He's been the model of consistency since 2008. And I mean, he's had 9-win seasons all every year but one, multiple national titles. I mean, he's done everything that you can ask him to do. And even in a season like last year where it really looked like the bottom was officially falling out on the Clemson program, he just flipped the switch halfway through the season and they figured things out and they got back onto the right track. They looked like they were figuring things out by the time the season ended. And of course, you have issues when you just don't have the personnel. The wide receiver problem was an issue last year. Didn't fit the scheme of the new offensive coordinator when Riley came in. And I mean, we don't know if the quarterback position's figured out yet. But at the end of the day, Dabo Sweeney has just simply done too much to not be a top 3 coach in college football. But he's my number 3.
Yeah, and again, you're obviously creating your list from a different set of circumstances than I am,
Sure.
and that's
That's
totally fine. Because like I said, you even mentioned the accomplishments, and I understand that. I'm talking. I made my list based on who I would want to start a program right now with, and there's
fine.
just no way he would be in the
No.
top 3 for
If
me. And again, we're just
if I'm doing the same thing that you're doing, he's not on my list.
right. We're just
He's
using different
probably not even
variables.
here. Yeah, that's
Yeah,
fine.
and that's why I had him at 10, just barely cracking it. So, and that's why my number 3 is Brian Kelly. You've mentioned him
Good
coming
coach.
over from Notre Dame to LSU, and despite some of the weirdness early on, as you also referenced, has kind of picked up right where that program was left off, and so things lined up this year. He created a Heisman winning quarterback and 2 top first round picks in on offense. And now you got to do it again, and then again, and then again, and that's the nightmare of the SEC. But Brian Kelly has just been a lot better than I thought he was going to really have some troubles there at LSU, and it has gone the opposite direction in my mind. So I had Brian Kelly at number 3.
So let's move into my number 2. I think that's a great one. Brian Kelly is. I had him at number 5, and the moment I came up to him at number 5, I'm like, I probably should have had him higher. But we start where we start. But my number 2 on this list is going to be Ryan Day.
Yeah.
Again, I just think you have to look at the sustained success that he's had at that program. I mean, you say he struggled against Michigan the last 3 years. Yes, so has the rest of college football for the most part. But Ryan Day is 39-0 against the rest of the Big Ten in the last 5 seasons. I mean, he's 56-8 overall. He's played in a New Year's Six bowl game or a college football playoff in every single season that he's been a head coach. He's had quarterbacks vying for Heisman trophies. He's had defensive players who've gone on to do big things in the NFL. He's been a wide receiver factory. Uh, I mean, they won back-to-back Big Ten titles in his first two seasons. They're 18-8 against AP top 25 opponents. I understand all three losses in the Big Ten play have come to Michigan, but at the same time, the only thing holding him back is a lack of a national championship. That's it. Because if he's lost 3 games to Michigan, but say Marvin Harrison Jr. doesn't get hit and they go on to beat Georgia and obviously I think they would smack TCU in the similar way, then Ryan Day is an unquestioned top 3 coach in college football, wouldn't you say? So those are just the way things happen sometimes. I mean, look, when they played Clemson a couple of years ago, and then you have the fumble that was ruled not a fumble, and that goes against you. And like, look, that happens. It's college football. Weird things happen when you have an oblong shape determining the outcome of football games. But Ryan Days consistently has his teams, has his teams in these situations, having him playing at the highest level. And that's been Ohio State the last couple of years. And I understand he started on third base. Yeah, Urban Meyer had that program at an incredibly high level by the time Ryan Day came in. But we are so far past that. He has done nothing but sustain that success that Urban Meyer set up at Ohio State. And I think he's one of the best coaches in college football. Of course, this year is the first year that we're going to see him as not the offensive play caller. You bringing in Chip Kelly, brought in Bill O'Brien, and now you're bringing in Chip Kelly to be your offensive coordinator. O'Brien probably was there long enough to go get in line at Starbucks. I don't even know if he had the cup of coffee, but he was in line and then got pulled out. Now he's at Boston College. But Ryan Day is my number 2 coach just because he's done nothing but win at the place that he's at. And I don't see any end in sight. I think this year, outside of the number 1 team on my list, they're the best team in college football. And I don't think it's very close.
Yeah, my number 2, it kind of goes away from the explanation for a lot of guys on my list. But again, I built my list based on if I were starting a program today, who would I take? And I have Dan Lanning at number 2. And I know that's a big jump for him from where you had him. And I totally understand that. But there's just something about him that I can't quantify. Maybe it's just the confidence that learning under Kirby Smart has given him, that Kirby type of mindset. But there's just something about him. They've got to win the big game, in which case they failed twice this year in losing to Washington. But he picked himself right back up. He set himself up with a quarterback power struggle, if you will, with Gabriel, and then a young guy as well right behind him. And so it just, I don't know. There's something about him where, and they may take a slight step back here year 1 into the Big Ten as they figure that out. But just something about Dan Lanning makes me trust his ability to stay at the top of college football or near the top of college football. That's why I have him at number 2. It's relatively unquantifiable. I understand that. But it's my list. So deal with it.
I look, at the end of the day, I see where you're coming from with it, and I guess it makes a lot of sense. My number 1.
Do we want to do it both at the same time?
The count of 3. 3, 2, 1. Kirby Smart. That's number 1. He's the top coach in college football. I don't even think it's not
no
even
explanations needed for your list or my list. We all know why Kirby's number 1.
He's 42-2 over his last 3 seasons. He has 2 national championships. He had Georgia at 8-5 in his first season and back in 2016, competing with the likes of McNeese State or whatever. And they were struggling in that game. But outside of that, since then, they've done nothing but win. They're the only team in the country to finish in the top 7 in the final AP poll every single year since 2017. I mean, Smart's Bulldogs, they played in an SEC championship or won it in 6 of those 7 seasons. You won 29 straight games, 2 back-to-back national championships. But the most interesting stat that I found when putting together this list is the fact that there is not a single active head coach that's beaten Kirby Smart. There is no active head coach who has beaten Kirby Smart. All of his losses in that span have come to Nick Saban. He's lost to him multiple times, 3 times. He lost to Dan Mullen at Florida that one time back in 2020. He lost to Ed Orgeron at LSU. He did that twice. He lost to Will Muschamp at South Carolina, which is a weird one. But look, there is no active head coach that has beaten Kirby Smart. It's just he is the unquestioned best coach in college football. I don't even think it's close.
Yeah, I didn't do any research or look up any stats to determine why Kirby was number one. I think I just kind of I started at one, wrote that down quickly, and then had to actually decipher out the rest of the list. It was always going to be Kirby. I think it'd be very tough to find anyone who would argue against that. So I'll halt my argument. I rest my case on that one.
Yeah. But in terms of evaluating, recruiting, and developing
all
players,
of it, complete package.
It's everything because
complete package.
The number one thing that people say, I know we're based in Atlanta, so we get a lot of dog talk here on the station, and the thing is, it's like, oh well, he just recruits good players and that's it. Yeah, that's a big part of it. But then you look at all the other players that he has. I mean,
but even that, you know what? That's an unfair comment too. Like recruiting good players, like Stetson Bennett was a walk-on, man.
I was just gonna say, Jordan Davis was a 3-star player, and he ended up being one of the top players in the country when he was at UGA. Stetson Bennett was a walk-on player. Lad McConkey was, he wanted to go to Tennessee.
He was a 3-star. He's a 3-star receiver. He just put him into this.
Tennessee wouldn't even offer him a scholarship. They said they didn't even come meet with him when they came to his high school. I mean, it was, and then he comes in and Lad McConkey became one of the most consistent players in the SEC while he was at Georgia. I mean, there's a laundry list of players who he turns into bona fide studs. Yes, of course you have the Jalen Carters, you have the Michael Walkers, you have the guys who really elevate and take their play to the next level while in college, but also were a 5-star player. That's great. I mean, for all those players, you have as many 3-star players who he has developed and turned into elite players. And there's a reason the best players want to come play at Georgia, at a place like that, because they develop you and they turn you into the best possible version of yourself. And it's the same thing you saw at Alabama, same thing you saw at Ohio State. There's a reason the top programs get the top players. It's not just because they have the biggest checkbook. It's because they give the players the best chance at success at the next level. And that's Kirby Smart personified. And I think there is no one. If you want to bet Georgia or the field every year for the next couple of years for a national championship, I think it's a safe bet to bet Georgia every now and then. It's a pretty solid bet that he's going to win a couple more national titles before it's all said and done. But he's the number one coach in college football. I think it's just a pretty much a steadfast fact. But anything else that you wanted to mention for these top coaches ranks?
Just let it be known, because of how the bet works, I would always take the field.
Of course, but you know what I mean.
Opportunity, but I do know what you mean.
You know what I mean.
No, it'll be interesting to see if we revisit this a year from now, because there is potential for teams for head coaches to fall or rise. I mean, if Dabo Swinney goes 8-4, he's out of the top 10. If Steve Sarkisian wins a national championship, he probably jumps Brian Kelly, and so would be interesting to see how we revisit this a year from now.
We'll definitely do that, Abe. I'll hang on to my list. You hang on to yours. We'll jump on this at the end of next season. I think that'd be a very.
I can also promise you, I will not be hanging on to this list.
You could have just said yes, and
I'll have to revisit. No, we'll have to revisit it, because there's no way I'm just keeping it saved as a note.
I have all my notes saved. I keep everything because
here's the deal. I'll take a picture of it. You can remind me a year from now to find the picture.
Deal. Sounds good to me. All right, Abe Gordon, that's been fun. Running through our list of top coaches in college football, plus our NCAA cover athletes were officially announced. And thank you all for listening. College Football Overtime. Make sure you rate, make sure you follow, make sure you do all the things that you do with podcasts. Give us 5 stars, drop a comment, tell us what we can do next time as we build up to the 2024 college football regular season. It'll be here before we know it. For Abe Gordon, my name is Garrett Chapman. We are College Football Overtime. Thank you so much for joining us. We will see you again this time next week. Thanks.